And I hope we have folks that are in the wait room who have been able to join. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Conversations on Brain Health. I will give it a second or two just to allow additional folks to join, but we will get us started here in just a second. So if we could just hold tight for a minute or two, I'd appreciate it. Wonderful. Excellent. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Of course, we started off the year with a little glitch last Monday, and I apologize to everybody for the frustration that folks had to endure by trying to log in and weren't able to access our webinar last Monday. But hopefully we're off to a new start and have this all smoothly ironed out for us going forward. So I appreciate everybody joining us again this week. Conversations on brain health for anybody who is new joining us for this particular session. This is a monthly webinar that runs every second Monday of each month. It's always exactly 1 hour long. And we bring in always a panel of experts in the area of brain health and multiple sclerosis in particular, but we will touch upon various subjects and always happy to have really great speakers that are joining us for these webinars. So this evening, we are going to be talking about healthy aging and the blue zones, which is, I think, a topic that all of us can take a lot of great interest in. We're all obviously wanting to know how we can age in a healthy way. So a great topic of conversation. So for folks that do have questions during this webinar, we welcome you to use the Q&A box or the chat box. I will be monitoring that during our discussion. So please feel free to put in any questions that you might have, and I will make sure that we get those answered within the time frame we have allotted for this hour. I think that's all from a housekeeping standpoint. So this evening, I do want to introduce our two speakers, which are Dr. Augusto Miravalle and Adrienne Castillo, both from Rush University Medical Center. So we will have Dr. Miravalle start us off, and then we will transition to Adrienne. So Dr. Miravalle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Adrienne, for sharing this space. And Happy New Year to everyone. As Kathy mentioned, we are super excited to start the year. And I think the topic is fantastic because I think hopefully this will help us create that wish list or goals that we can establish for our year in ways that we can hopefully be healthier and promote healthy aging. So what we have today is a very similar structure as what we usually use for these conversations on brain health. So we'll start with some scientific discussion on kind of like the science behind, in this case, healthy aging. And then Adrienne is going to walk us through some more practical data, practical information that hopefully will inspire us to, incorporate those in our life. So I'm going to share my screen. And so I have a few slides that I put together for today's presentation. And for those who have an interest in accessing the slides, we can certainly be happy to share this. And the way to do that is maybe communicate with Kathy, and she'll be happy to share the slides. My name is Augusto Miravalle. As Kathy mentioned, I serve as chief of the multiple sclerosis division at Rush. And we'll talk today about a few things, but perhaps start by discussing what are the elements that influence aging. So when you look at the process that is involved with aging, which, by the way, is a natural occurring process, and what are the factors that will play a role in aging? Well, one is what we call the cellular or intercellular communication. So when the cells talk to each other, that process become altered over time. The genes and the DNA become more stable, and that leads to more chances for mutation. There is something we call telomerase attrition or telomeric attrition. We'll talk a lot about that today, so I'm going to skip that one. Then there is what we call epigenetic alterations. So the things we do in our life, the lifestyle that we choose to have, the diet, the exercise, the environment that we live is going to alter or modify our genes, not the structure of the genes, but how these genes are expressed. That's something we call epigenetic alterations. And that's why we are all for lifestyle interventions at Rush, because we know that the choices that we make in our life will alter the way we express our genes. So then there's all these other terms that perhaps are a little bit more scientific based that ultimately will lead to this function of the cells itself. Nutrient sensing. So what we not only what we eat, but how our body respond to what we eat is going to change over time. That small little organelle that is inside the cells called the mitochondria that is critical for many functions, but particularly for altering the way our oxygen is going to affect a cellular function. Perhaps you heard about oxidative stress or antioxidants. So when we talk about antioxidants, we are actually talking about affecting this organelle inside the cell called the mitochondria that, depending how we regulate the end results of this oxidative stress, could lead to good or bad outcomes. And those processes are affected by aging. And then, of course, the stem cells, those pluripotent cells, the cells that actually are in a bone marrow and differentiate into any type of cell in the system. Also, there's going to be some exhaustion of those cells over time. So all of these processes are happening to all of us. And so how we affect these processes is going to determine how we age. And certain things we choose to do are going to promote more of a healthier aging, where certain things we choose to do may accelerate that aging. But I want to focus in the one in red here called the telomere attrition, because that has to do with how our cells ultimately age over time. And many things we choose to do are going to affect this. So what are telomeres? So telomeres are those caps that are going to be at the end of the chromosome. And I have a picture for you so you can actually see what I mean with that. And this portion of the DNA, this portion of the genetic code, is going to be critical for many functions, but certainly for aging. So telomeres are going to affect the stability of the cell, are going to affect how rapid or well the cell divides. It's also going to maintain the cell from or preventing certain mutations. So keeping these telomeres is very important. So here's a picture of what I mean. So what you see in that red cross, that's a representation of a chromosome. We have in our cells, we have chromosomes, and inside those chromosomes, we have the DNA, which is the genetic code. At the end of the chromosomes, you have those blue dots, the blue areas. So those regions are what we call the telomeres. So those telomeres are portions of the genetic code that are there to protect the cell. But what happens is after each division of the cell, then we are going to see a shortening of the telomeres. So every time is, let's say, a skin cell or a hair cell or a kidney cell divides, and from that cell you become, two cells, and from those two cells you become four cells. With every division of the cell, the telomere is going to become shorter and shorter and shorter. And it is estimated that on average, our cells in our body can divide up to 40 to 60 times. And so, and you can imagine after all of these cycles of divisions, the length of the telomere, it's going to become shorter. And when we exhaust the telomere, so when the chromosomes do not have any more telomere available, that's going to lead to cell death. So ultimately, the process of aging is directly linked and in parallel to the shortening of this part of the DNA. So what we call, telomere attrition is that the scientific term that we use to describe what I just explained, which is this gradual shortening of the telomeres as a consequence of this cell division. And every time the cell divides, the telomere shortens slightly. And once the telomeres reach a critical length, when they become so short and so small, the cell can no longer divide properly. And let me give you a practical example. So let's say that someone chooses to sunbathe and you like to go to the ocean and you expose yourself to sun. In the short term, the skin looks a little bit nicer, that bronze color that, we as humans learn to find attractive. However, what happened to the health of the skin over time? Well, if you constantly expose your skin to the sun, the cell becomes aged. And perhaps we've seen people that are exposed to sun and the skin becomes more leathery, more, older looking skin. But also, there is another consequence of exposure to sun, which is skin cancer. So, those two processes are directly explained by the exposure to sun induces more rapid cell division because you have to constantly be replacing those skin cells that were damaged by sun exposure. So, what you're doing is you're accelerating the process of aging by inducing more cell division in the skin. And so perhaps that's the easiest way to get our head around on how the choices that we make could influence aging. In this case, perhaps the largest organ that we have, which is the skin. Can we measure the length of the telomeres? Yes, there are tests that actually we can use, not widely used in medicine. Those are tests that usually are used in research environments, but we can actually measure the length of the telomere. And that is becoming a biomarker of interest when studying, for example, the process of aging. And through those research studies, we are learning that there are certain factors that actually accelerate this process of aging by shortening the telomeres. Among those factors is what we talked about, the UV light or exposure to sun, but also pollution. And, we are seeing now that research studies are showing that individuals who are exposed to air pollution, there is a higher risk of certain health issues, for example, dementia, and is now a well-established risk factor for dementia. And perhaps that has to do with, again, you're constantly having to, divide or clean up the consequences of air pollution, and by doing so, you're stimulating more rapid cell division. And as we mentioned before, these reactive oxygen species that come from inflammatory conditions or pro-inflammatory conditions are also going to damage the telomeres. And as I explained to you, the negative factors, you can start thinking about the good things that we can do to prevent shortening of the telomeres. So now let's put that process, which is kind of like inside the cell. We talked about the DNA, the chromosomes, the telomeres, and how after each cell division, we shorten gradually the telomeres, and that leads to aging. So now imagine that in every single cell in your body, your brain cells, your eye cells, your lung, your blood cells. So the things that we know that are affecting aging has to do with how we are preventing or inducing rapid cell division. And by doing that, we are making that organ having shorter and shorter telomeres and aging faster. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and I don't know, Kathy, if there are any questions or comments in the audience.
Well, there was one question that came actually before you even started talking. So it has to do with if exercise is vital for longevity, which we know exercise is incredibly healthy for brain health. What kinds of exercise are most important for patients with multiple sclerosis in specific?
It's a great question. And so we have a lot of data now on not only the benefits of exercise in multiple sclerosis and in brain health in both, but also the type of exercise. I like to start by explaining the why, right? So it's not just because exercise is good. We know that every time we are using our muscles, we are moving, we are inducing brain activity. So every activity that positively uses our brain is going to be good for brain health. but also there is this cardiometabolic benefit of exercise, meaning you're pumping more blood, and by doing that, you're bringing more oxygen to the tissues. And we just talked about radical oxygen species and oxidative stress and how negative that is to the body. Well, if you're bringing good oxygen to the tissues, you're preventing that. So exercise is not only good for brain health, but exercise is also good for pretty much any organ that requires oxygen to function. In terms of the type of exercise, well, now we have published guidelines in multiple sclerosis, and I'm part of the steering committee that is reviewing those guidelines to update them. But the last version of the guidelines recommend a total of 150 minutes per week. So 150 minutes per week. That's roughly 2.5 hours of exercise. And then ideally, you should divide that into 50% of that being aerobic and 50% of that being more strength training or balance or course training exercises. So that's in general, that's the recommendation that we have for everyone. As you may know, if your patient arrives, we like to personalize these recommendations. So what we do is meet with patients one-on-one. Adrienne Castillo runs the Brain Health Clinic, and she can talk to you more about that. And then try to kind of tailor that recommendation to your particular needs.
Good.
Very
Thank you,
good. I
Dr.
apologize
Miha.
if you hear my cat behind. It's our cat with Kathy, so she's asking to go out, but I'm gonna ignore that for a minute. So you might hear her in the background.
Yeah, hear it. You're good.
Okay. So let's move on now. So how about this concept of telomere attrition and multiple sclerosis? So we know that, that process also applies to MS, and there are certain things that are more MS specific that perhaps may induce more of a rapid loss of the telomeres if we don't address them. For example, inflammation. So we know that if we don't address inflammation in MS, that could lead to more of a rapid decline of the amount of telomeres that cells have. We also know that in order to remyelinate or repair, our cells rely on the telomeres. So having intact telomeres is going to help to those cells to repair or remyelinate. And of course, we know that progression may be linked to that attrition of telomeres, which ultimately, as I mentioned before, being able to measure the length of the telomeres may be a biomarker that we might use in the future to kind of, again, get a clear picture of what is happening here. So this is a busy slide, I recognize that, but if any, I want to put this slide here to explain that it's not just one process that determines progression, or in this case, aging. There are many, many factors that influence that process. And I will not go into every one, but the reason why we have these programs, the reason why we have the Brain Health Clinic is to try to address them all. And, it's important to have a well-balanced, overall healthy life, not just diet, not just exercise, but actually look at everything we do and try to optimize that as much as we can. So we know that diet is important, and certain things that we eat can promote or avoid that telomere attrition. So the things that are protected are the elements in the MIND diet or the Mediterranean diet that we always talk about. As someone mentioned, exercise is very important. There are certain factors that are not so good, like smoking or passive smoking is negative. It's going to hurt the ability of the cell to replicate, and obesity and pesticides. I mean, all those are the negative factors. And as I mentioned before, when you put them all together into our formula, are going to directly impact this process. So this is just to show how this, telomere attrition could kind of fit into the story of someone with multiple sclerosis. So early on, in the very early stages of the disease, when someone is looking at cells that have, the full length of the telomeres, and it's our role to help prevent any attrition on that. By doing that, by preventing inflammation, by promoting healthy lifestyle choices. But if we don't do that, one of the consequences that there could be this early process of senescence or a aging, and that could lead to accumulation of disability, that could lead to MS progression. So what can we do with all this information? Well, there are two things that are happening simultaneously. One is, as I mentioned before, using this knowledge to try to develop biomarkers so we can actually use this knowledge in understanding what is happening in someone's MS journey. But also there are certain therapies that has been developed that are intended to, and there is an enzyme called the telomerase that actually the telomerase, it's there to help rebuild the telomeres. It's great conceptually to think about promoting aging, healthy aging. The risk, of course, is, if you are interfering with a normal process of cell death or control on division, and number one risk of that is cancer, right? So we know that if you induce more divisions in a cells, or you stop the normal processes to control that, these cells may become malignant, and ultimately you could induce cancer. So we are not ready to recommend these therapies. These therapies are being studied, and as I mentioned before, the number one concern is the development of uncontrolled growth that could lead to cancer. So with that, I'm going to just end with the presentations there, where we're going with thought-provoking to see if we can use that in our algorithm of care. Of course, we are looking at how these environmental factors and lifestyle interventions affect this process. And then, of course, more clinical studies looking at the interventions in preventing telomere attrition. So I'm going to stop sharing now and then see if there are any questions.
So no additional questions that have come into the Q&A box as of yet, but I will definitely continue to monitor. And if not, we can transition on over to Adrienne. I know it is a rather complex process of understanding. And when I actually was able to review Dr. Miravalle's presentation prior to today's webinar, I learned a few new things about these chromosomes, that the telomeres that are such a key player in our aging process. So who would have known that something so small is actually so important in this whole process? So thank you, Dr. Miravalle, for that more scientific understanding of what is involved in this process. I'd like to bring Adrienne back onto the screen, and maybe we can turn things over. And folks, if questions, do be shy with putting those into the Q&A box. Like I said, I am monitoring those and happy to address anything that comes through. So Adrienne Castillo, who runs our brain health clinic there at Rush University Medical Center. So happy to have her talk a little bit about the blue zones in the world. And I think it's actually really neat that there are pockets around the world that have shown that longevity and long life is possible, and exactly what is the mystery behind what they are doing in those areas. So Adrienne, I am going to bring your presentation of Adrienne here, and we will jump into the second part of our presentation regarding blue zones. So can everybody see this okay? All right. So the one thing I have to say is, since I am actually pushing the slides, I can't monitor the Q&As. So we're going to have to wait until the end to answer any Q&As when I can maybe bring the presentation down. So Adrienne, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our presentation today. And Kathy, thank you for pushing my slides. First of all, I wanted you all to know that in preparation for this presentation, I put on many anti-aging serums to see if it would make a difference. So I hope I'm looking like I'm ready to live a long life, because I am. And so let's get started. Oh, also note, you'll also notice the blue color scheme of my slides. Enjoy. So tonight we're going to be discovering the world's best lessons in health and longevity by learning about the blue zones of the world. And the blue zones are regions where people live significantly longer and healthier lives. And there's 5 blue zones of the world: Loma Linda, California in the United States, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, Ikaria, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan. You can advance, Kathy. You can advance. Yeah, thank you. So the story behind the blue zones. In 1996, the Danish twin study established that only about 20% of how long an average person lives is dictated by genes, whereas the other 80% is lifestyle. And starting in 2004, Dan Buettner, who was very inspired by this study and was also a National Geographic explorer and fellow, was determined to uncover the specific lifestyle and environmental aspects that led to longevity. So he established a team of experts, scientists, researchers, demographers, anthropologists, and they went on an expedition that was sponsored by National Geographic. And they obtained a grant from the National Institute of Aging. So with Buettner and his team, they found 5 demographically confirmed, geographically defined areas where people reach 100 at 10 times greater rates than in the United States. And this was over a period of about 5 to 6 years. Dan Buettner dubbed these areas blue zones. And him and his team found that the lifestyles of all blue zone residents shared about 9 specific characteristics, and those are called the Power 9. You can advance. So there's a lot of evidence that support the blue zones, and I just wanted to review 3 types of studies that went into supporting the blue zones. Demographic studies, such as the research done by demographers in Sardinia, Italy, where they found an unusually high number of male centenarians, those who lived to 100 and over. And the studies there showed that genetics, along with lifestyle factors, played a big role in longevity. And then there were epidemiological studies in Okinawa that revealed the highest proportion of centenarians in the world. And again, studies attributed the longevity to a plant-based diet, an active lifestyle, and strong social connections. You can advance, Kathy. And then there were epidemiological research, such as the Adventist Health Study that was conducted in Loma Linda, California. And it found that the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda live significantly longer than the average American. And again, this was linked to the vegetarian diet, regular physical activity, and strong community bonds. And then in Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, the Nicoyans were found to have lower rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and that their longevity was attributed to a calcium-rich diet, physical activity, and strong family networks. You can advance. And then there was ethnographic field work by Dan Buettner and his team, where they identified blue zone regions by observing and documenting lifestyle practices. Those included dietary habits, social structures, physical activity, and stress management techniques. So now getting back to the Power 9, the Blue Zones uncovered 9 evidence-based lifestyle habits among the world's centenarians that are believed to slow the aging process. So let's get into those. The first of the Power 9 is to move naturally. Live in an environment that encourages moving without even thinking about it. And remember, all physical activity required to complete your activities of daily living, housework, and other chores and errands all count toward physical activity. Gardening, walking to do errands instead of driving, and maybe parking your car further away from the entrance to get more steps in. You can advance. Oh, and purpose is number 2. The Nicoyans call it the plan de vida, or why I wake up in the morning. And believe it or not, but knowing your sense of purpose is going to add 7 years of extra life expectancy. So feeling like you have a purpose, knowing your purpose, looking for your purpose, it all counts. Kathy. Downshifting. What does this mean? Well, chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation. And the longest lived people have routines to get rid of their stress. For example, the Okinawans take a few moments a day to remember their ancestors. Adventists pray. Icarians take a nap. And Sardinians do happy hour. Oh, I love saying this. Hara Hachi Bu. It's the 80% rule, and it's an Okinawan Confucian mantra that's said before meals. And what it does is it reminds you to stop eating when stomachs are 80% full. So the 20% gap between not being hungry and feeling full could be a difference between losing and gaining weight. Another interesting thing is that people who live in blue zones eat their smallest meal in the late afternoon or early evening, and then nothing after that for the rest of the day. So built-in weight management technique. So your next tattoo might say Hara Hachi Bu. Or maybe that's my tattoo, my first tattoo. Okay, you can advance. And the plant slant. Beans are the cornerstone of the centenarian diet. Beans like fava, black beans, lentils. And meat is only consumed on special occasions and on an average of about 5 times per month. And the serving size of meat is like 3 to 4 ounces, so like a size of a deck of cards. And you can go. Oh, it's wine o'clock. So except for the Adventists, people in the blue zones do drink alcohol moderately and regularly, it's usually wine. And actually, the people in Sardinia make a wine called Cannonau wine, and it's higher in polyphenols than any other red wine. So your next trip should be to Sardinia for Cannonau. So the other thing that's good about the people who live in blue zones, they drink with friends and eat when drinking. It's a social event. And this is my time to remind you that the guidelines in regards to alcohol consumption, women are allowed 1 drink per day, men 2 drinks per day. And by a drink, if it's wine, it's 5 ounces. And if you don't drink alcohol right now, then don't start. And actually, on the news lately, you may have heard the Surgeon General's latest advisory on the link between alcohol consumption and cancer. And they are calling for a reassessment of the guideline limits for alcohol consumption to account for that cancer risk. And so you may, in the near future, be seeing an advisory on a can of beer, just like you do a pack of cigarettes, bringing it to your attention about that link. Oh, and this is very important, is to feel connected to a group, to feel like you belong. Interesting that 5 out of the 263 centenarians interviewed belonged to a faith-based community, and denomination didn't matter. And having said that, maybe it's just a community. Maybe it doesn't have to be faith-based, but just, a community where you're growing a garden together, your knitting club, your girls' night out, whatever community it is where that fosters a sense of belonging is very important to longevity. Thank you, Kathy. Oh, and keep your loved ones near and dear. Centenarians in the blue zones kept aging parents and grandparents nearby or in their home. They often lived with them, obviously not when they were 100, but probably when they were, all along until no more. And then centenarians also had a commitment to a life partner. And if they had kids, they invested in their children with time and love. You can advance. And lastly, find your tribe. It really is important because social circles support healthy behaviors. And it was the Framingham studies that showed that smoking, obesity, happiness, and even loneliness are contagious. So birds of a feather flock together. There's a reason for that saying. If you're going out with a group for, drinking and smoking, and you're more than likely going to be drinking and smoking right along with them. So today's a good day to think about your social circles and your tribe of people, and to think about whether or not healthy behaviors are part of that social circle. And if they're not, maybe it's time to reinvent that social circle. Oh, and of course, what would a talk from me be without a challenge, a healthy behavior challenge? So, research shows that we spend 90% of our lives within 5 miles of our homes. So, in honor of this presentation, make small changes to your environment where longevity ensues. eat 100, so that you can eat 100 fewer calories or burn a couple of hundred extra calories through physical activity. So I put some examples in there. Get rid of the salty, sugary, processed snacks and instead put a bowl of fruit on your counter, on your kitchen table. And next time you need a snack, guess what? The bad stuff won't be there, but the fruit will be there. And you just created an environment that's conducive to healthy behavior. Okay, now whoever has a Roomba, that's that robotic vacuum that you program. Well, what's wrong, as long as you can do it, what's wrong with actually pushing and pulling the vacuum, the old-fashioned vacuum? It's going to give you lots of extra calories that you've burned. So bring that back out of the closet. And if you ever thought about getting a pool, well, now's the time to make a decision, because between having owned a pool, maintaining it, and then getting in it for about 2 to 3 months will help you burn extra calories and make you more physically active. And in conclusion, why I wanted to talk about the blue zones, well, it provided a model for healthier living, and it has implications for brain health and MS, such as an anti-inflammatory diet that's filled with polyphenols, omega-3 fatty acids, and complex carbs, just like the MIND diet. Regular physical activity to maintain mobility and balance and strength. And very important is the stress reduction practices that help to manage symptoms, maybe such as fatigue. And that's my presentation, the end.
Fantastic, Adrienne. Thank you so much. So
Welcome.
I have been made aware that for some folks, the Q&A is not working. So that could be part of the problem as to why we're not getting any questions coming through. So one question that came through via email that I received, and I'm going to bring Dr. Miravalle back to the table as well, is CoQ10. So if you could maybe speak a little bit about that. I know that's been a big hype out there regarding a supplement for healthy brains, so to speak, I guess. If you could speak about CoQ.
Absolutely, Kathy. And I can see some questions, so I'm happy to go over the ones that I can actually see. But yeah, CoQ10 is been around for a while, and it's a coenzyme that is part of this process of oxidative stress inside the mitochondria. So it's known to kind of avoid the accumulation of certain radical species of the oxygen metabolism. So it's known to be antioxidant. So, I'm not aware of any risks of CoQ10. I think the controversy become more on, recommending that with evidence that is going to promote anything that we can measure. I know that in certain brain disorders like Parkinson's disease, perhaps there is more evidence in favor of using CoQ10. In MS, we are kind of like, well, we don't truly have anything to recommend, but I also don't have anything to advise against. I see a question. I don't know, Kathy, if you can see the rest of the questions.
I do. Yep.
Okay.
And actually glad to see that the question regarding CoQ10 did come through after all. So perfect. So there was a question regarding the Mediterranean diet, and I know diet is obviously incredibly important, one of the main pillars of brain health, and the Mediterranean/Mind diet, which I think is even, you need to put it a little bit closer to the screen because it was blurry there, Adrienne. The Mind Diet book that you just put up. Can you put it up again? There you go. Yes. So Mind Diet. There's a lot of great information regarding the Mind Diet, but if we could just maybe speak about the diet you recommend to prevent brain atrophy or telomere loss. So I
And
think,
Adrian, feel free to chime in. I know you're an expert on that too. But yeah, the MIND diet is a Mediterranean DASH diet, which includes the low sodium diet for cardiovascular health. So it's a Mediterranean intervention for neurological disorders, and now it's been rated #1 diet for brain health by the U.S. News and World News, and actually that's been developed at Rush. So we are very proud of that. So the mind diet asks for the elements that are included in the Mediterranean, which includes green leafy vegetables, as well as fruits, particularly those dark berries, blueberries, blackberries, as well as grains, and also in terms of animal-based protein sources, fish, particularly those darker fish, as well as poultry or white meats, and stay away from anything that has trans fats, particularly those red meats that are delicious. And we choose those riba steaks that they have this nice marbling, but actually that's actually trans fat, so it's not good for you. Anything else, Adrian, on the mind diet that I may forgot?
Well, I have my handy cheat sheet here, and there's olive oil at the bottom there. But remember when I said that the centenarians made beans the cornerstone of their diet? So beans are recommended at least 3 times per week, and a serving size is half a cup. So, in the brain health clinic, I often get a lot of questions. I don't know. It's not that I don't like beans, but I don't want to make them. How do you incorporate them into your diet? One thing that I think is highly recommended, well, by me, is make a big salad. Throw the beans in your salad. Hummus is, you can make a white bean hummus, and you could even buy a black bean hummus and a white bean hummus. Black bean tacos. And I'm telling you, I have the recipes. So if you're looking for recipes, I will send them to you. And these are things that I make in my own home, so I know it's delicious. And what about, football? The Super Bowl is coming up. It's time to make a 3-bean chili.
well, and
Love
it's
it.
the winter season, so soups, right? I think it's
Soups.
so like easy to integrate beans into a soup. Um,
Yes.
Great
Same
season for
for
it.
whole grains. You know, um, you could make quinoa ahead of time and throw that into your salad as well, or mix quinoa with spinach, and a little avocado, tomato, drizzle it with lemon and olive oil, and you've got a perfect Mediterranean salad.
Excellent. So there's a question around now that TA65 is on the market and you can buy it. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Miravalle? Are you against using it, or what's your feelings?
Not ready to recommend it, and the reason being the concern on cancer risk. And so I think more studies, particularly long-term follow-up studies, are needed in order to truly ensure that it's the medication itself, for in case there is lack of context, is a telomerase activator. So basically what you do, we all have that enzyme called a telomerase that is going to not only prevent shortening of the telomeres, but actually promote expansion of the telomere. And every cell has some degree of telomerase. Some certain cells have more. So those cells that are rapidly dividing cells, like the blood cells or the immune cells. I mean, MS patients are very familiar with the lymphocytes. So those cells have more of that telomerase. So when you activate that enzyme, it's great for aging, but also there might be consequences of what if this rapid cell division becomes uncontrolled. So, nature we've been designed in a very beautiful, sophisticated way as humans, and every time you interfere with that process, consequences may happen. So I'm not ready to recommend that, but it's exciting to think that there might be a mechanism by which we could positively affect that process.
Thank you. And Adrienne, were you going to say something?
And in the meantime, just make a visit with me so we can discuss all the lifestyle pillars, so that you can do something proactively in the meantime.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Absolutely. So this is actually a really great question, and it's in regards to our environment and how our environment potentially could affect aging. And I think there's definitely some interplay there. If you can maybe speak about that, Dr. Miravalle.
Absolutely. And the environment that we live, it has so many different domains that could affect our aging process, anywhere from negative factors in the environment, pollution, exposure to certain chemicals in the environment, pesticides. But also, as Adrienne was mentioning, certain environments are more conducive to less physical activity, and we kind of are preoccupied every day with the things that we're supposed to do, and it's hard to take some time and reflect on more healthy habits. I saw a question on meditation. And there are different forms of meditation. The traditional spiritual-based forms are great, but also certain environments almost force you to meditate without even knowing about it. When you're going for a hike in Colorado, or when you're in front of the ocean in Florida, or anywhere that actually exposes you to nature, I believe that's a form of meditation. So I think the environment plays so many roles in not only the way we feel, but also the way our body respond to that.
And I might piggyback on to that too. And sorry, Adrienne. Even environments where you're exposed potentially to more pollution could be impacting us in a pretty extreme way. Um,
Absolutely.
Adrienne, I'm sorry to interfere.
No, and for me, it's really about the environment that impacts in a negative way your ability to connect with people, an environment that it promotes loneliness. Loneliness is an epidemic. And what we know from my talk, from Dr. Miravalle's talk, is that purpose, connection, your social tribe, it all makes a difference. And from all this Dan Buettner's studies, the characteristics amongst the centenarians was that they were in an environment that promoted purpose, connection. They were not lonely. And this again is something that I really dig deep into when I see you in the brain health clinic, is to be able to identify, you know, um, if you have purpose and connection every day, what are the barriers to that? How can we improve on that? So that's
And I'm gonna plug something here, because I think that resource is so unique, Adrienne, what you offer. And it's one thing is just knowledge, which is what we are trying to offer here through these sessions, right? So expose our wonderful audience to the information, the data, the scientific research, but then we need to bridge that gap between understanding the why and now learn the what, right? So how can I incorporate this knowledge into my life? And it's hard. It is very difficult to change. It's difficult to change our diet, our exercise routine. So having a resource like what you offer, that allows individuals not only to understand, what are the areas that perhaps need some help, but most importantly, how are we going to impact those areas? How are we going to determine the goals and keep people accountable, keep people, in the right track to be able to accomplish those goals? That's a wonderful resource.
There's a lot of compassionate coaching coming out of my office.
And I
Yes,
think
absolutely.
also it stimulates that um, that change in behavior. And that what I presented today is the knowledge that if you remember something from that, is knowing that what we choose to do directly affect at the cellular level how the cells will respond to that. So don't undermine the power of lifestyle choices. They have a profound impact. And not only just eating healthy and exercising, but also, as we were talking before, connecting with others, social connection, mindfulness, purpose. I mean, things that perhaps we don't think that they might impact our health, they have a profound effect in our health.
And sometimes we need a little bit of assistance in being coached as to how to go about those steps. And that's where Adrienne comes in and it is super helpful. There was one last question in the chat. Oh, and maybe another one that just came through, but it has to do with not cigarette smoking per se, but smoking, and it is tobacco ceremoniously through a pipe, and whether that may have any kind of aging impact, and particularly any specific implications to dementia.
Yeah, the only study that I'm aware that showed that chewing nicotine or tobacco products was beneficial was a study coming from Sweden. And since then, it has not been replicated. Other than that, every single study that looked at tobacco products did not show a benefit, and if any, showed that it has a negative effect on health. When you look at ceremonial rituals, that becomes a little bit of a tricky situation because the interventions is not simple, right? It's not just smoking, but it's also what goes along with that ritual, right? Maybe the connections, the social environment, again, mindfulness. All those things are very important for brain health. And I thought I saw a question about meditation and mindfulness.
Mhm.
Mindfulness actually is one of those activities that have shown a positive effect on brain cells, particularly one part of the brain called the hippocampus. That's our memory center in the temporal lobe. And those neurons in the hippocampus have the ability to regenerate, to create more neurons. And that's how we build more memories. So mindfulness and meditation was one of those activities that strongly correlated with better health in those neurons. So if you have that interest, or you're probably already doing that, I will say keep doing that and keep reinforcing the fact that it's good for you.
I do want to be sensitive to the fact that we only have a few more minutes left. There is one last question, and again, it goes back to supplements. And wanted to just quickly get your thoughts, Dr. Miravalle, regarding Prevagen and other similar supplements. And this is something I'm not familiar with. Moringa and Silagit. Um,
So I'm not familiar with the last two. With the Prevagen, yes, and in general, the recommendation is no, follow a healthy lifestyle, and that's going to be more comprehensive, has more of a profound effect in your health. A pill is not going to be the answer to brain health, at least in isolation. There is so much effect that we can create by eating healthy and connecting with others and exercise, all the things that we're talking here. So and also I think that there is a little bit of a behavioral problem of, again, it's such a complex issue that it's not going to get fixed with a medication.
I love one of these last comments that came through with Rush starting a MS tribe and meeting up at a Mediterranean restaurant to chat. So I love the thoughts. There was a question for me regarding sharing the presentations from this evening. I've checked in with both Dr. Miravalle and Adrienne beforehand, and that is okay with both of them. So happy to pass that on as well.
Kathy, if you may allow me, we have a brain health program coming in. It's going to be a 3-week comprehensive review of brain health in MS. Kathy, what are the dates, and do we have openings for that program?
Yes, so I'm happy you are mentioning this. So The next MS Brain Health program, as Dr. Mira has stated, it is a 3-week program on Tuesday and Thursday evenings that we meet up, so 6 live sessions. We start our very first program of 2025 next Tuesday, and I do still have spots open. So if there's anybody on this call this evening and is still interested, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I am happy to get you in as quickly as possible. So that's our upcoming program, again, starting Tuesday, January 28th, coming up real soon. So please do keep me posted, but
Oh,
we will
Kathy,
be, yeah,
sorry. So it runs for 3 weeks and 6 live sessions, all
correct.
virtual. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep. So there are some pre-recorded videos to watch as part of the program. And then the 3-week program starting January 28th through February 13th on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. They're 1-hour sessions. So I hope I'm not missing anything there, but reach out if you have questions, and I'm more than happy to answer those. I think this has been a really great session. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And apologies once again for our technical difficulties last week. If anybody has questions that come up after we log off this evening, again, feel free to reach out to me and we will be sure to answer any questions that come up. So thanks so much for joining us for our very first session of 2025. As stated, all of our conversations are on the second Monday of every month. So the next one will be, oh, I should know that right
10th?
off the top. Yes, February 10th. So hope everybody will be back to join us then. And we will have the MS nurse practitioners join us for that particular session, where we're also going to be talking about infusions and how to prepare yourself for that visit. So looking forward to having Adrienne back with us, as well as her team there from the Rush University Medical Center. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay warm and be safe out there. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.